Hello, welcome. Thank you everyone for finding us. Hi, Ceri. We're going to be talking about another conversation with all kinds of things, but quite a good focus with this one. I'll start, Ceri, if you can give us a few lines. For those who don't know who you are, I'm sure anyone on Twitter who's following me is definitely following you. But yeah, just give a couple of lines about kind of who you are and what you're doing here.
I'm Ceri Black, and about a year and a half ago, I was just a mum from Portadown, bringing up my kids. And then I got piqued and I set up a Twitter account. And a year and a half later, I'm at FemLoves and I'm currently waiting to find out if I'm going to have to go to court to defend my tweets about child protection.
It's a bizarre, a bizarre state of affairs to be in, I'm sure.
I mean, the good thing about it is that it's made me look in my heart and find a suffragette spirit there, which I didn't know I had.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'll ever be the same as I was before.
Mm-hmm.
But it's definitely been an interesting couple of years.
Yeah. So I asked you a while ago if you'd be up for doing a conversation about things gay men need to know. So I'm doing these videos. Originally, that was going to be the focus of all the videos, and we've kind of expanded out a bit, but that's the core of what I want people to kind of have conversations about, because women have kind of got it and been there, particularly lesbians, in terms of seeing the dangers of gender identity ideology and the kind of surrounding issues, and gay men later and less so, and straight men even later and less so. So I'm really keen as a gay man to do more to kind of particularly pique more gay men and to understand what's going on. And then the gay men who are already kind of in the debate and are starting to get it or have been in it for a while, just that they have a better understanding of the breadth of the non-movement movement, because it's not a cohesive movement. There's lots of different strands, but understanding that although we've all got a common enemy, I'm going to try to stop doing air quotes as well, common enemy, that the effect of it on different groups is different, and understanding each other is important, and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I asked you to come and have a chat about what gay men need to know and do. And we were just talking before we hit record about you're kind of wondering whether to do it. So kind of what
Yeah.
thought process doing it.
So I thought, well, do I want to go and do a seminar, which is basically what women want for gay men? Like, what do these mysterious and delicate creatures need?
Yeah.
Like, as if we haven't been telling you. But then I thought, well, no, somebody's asking me. Like, I'm being asked, and so I'll go along. I think there's a difficulty as well that the people who most need to hear it are going to be the ones who need to hear it in a baritone voice, as opposed to an alto. So there's that too. But then you're here with your baritone tones. Yeah. So,
and that's a key thing. And there's other people I've got kind of lined up to have conversations with who talk specifically about that. And I've mentioned it on a couple of other videos, I think, about in the kind of political sphere, the decision makers, where they're majority men, and then they're the men who will only listen to men or tend to not listen to women. So actually, we need men to be saying the things and supporting the messages women are saying, so that those men actually listen to someone. And the same in the kind of LGBT world, is that gay men tend to be if you can get them, you've kind of got that group. And there's a lot of gay men going along with it that either don't bother or aren't hearing or whatever. So actually piquing more gay men. So yeah, I think the getting men to hear men's voices with women's messaging, which is a bizarre. I was had to talk to Sam about this, about how the double misogyny of it is kind of bizarre, but that's where we are.
I have a couple of fellas on Twitter who you can recognize the people who turn up on my timeline who need to hear it from a fella. Yeah. And there's a couple of fellas on Twitter who I have permission to summon to deal with them. And it's amazing. It's just amazing how they're being kind of virulently horrible to me. And then a bloke turns up saying essentially the same things.
Yeah, there is I know a few people talked about this in terms of once we fix the main problem, we need to fix this main problem, because actually there's still stuff that we need to do in that kind of example of the a meeting at work, and then a woman says a thing, and then a man repeats it, and everyone's like, "Oh, good idea, Jeff." There's those sorts of things that, like, the gender debate is kind of getting in the way of still finishing off dealing with those sorts of issues. So yeah, it's frustrating. That's what we kind of have to do. But I feel, I've talked to others about, I kind of feel a responsibility as a gay man, particularly to reach that group of men. But obviously, some of those messages are applicable to all men. So I know you've got like you tweeted to ask people for thoughts as well, or kind of what to kind of to say or talk about. And I know there's loads more, so I'm sure, you know, we've got a limited amount of time today, but we can always come back and do more. But I know you've kind of got thoughts corralled to kind of to talk about. So where do you want to start?
Well, I have a to-do list for you.
Okay.
So I mean, where should we start? I've got a couple of substantive issues that I think women find quite difficult when it comes to gay men specifically.
Yeah.
But I've also got some kind of tone issues and like how to be in the debate.
Yeah.
Things. So should we start with the tone bits?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, and the first thing is that if you're new to this debate, then you should realise that you have joined a group that is mainly composed of women. There are some men here already, but mainly it's women. And a good number of those women have very good reason to be angry with and frightened of fellas. Many of us have done a lot of work to deal with it. Some of us it's very new. And I think anybody who's been in the debate for more than 5 minutes have experienced harassment online, and some of us are currently waiting to find out if we're going to court. There's wives who've lost their husbands. There's lesbians whose spaces have been colonized. There's mothers who've lost their children. And there's a lot of angry, hurt women in this debate. And you are not going to find women very keen to give out any medals to men for the basics of human decency.
Yeah.
And then you add in on top of that the fact that many of us have decided we are no longer going to participate in certain sorts of activities. So I took a conscious decision that I'm not going to appease, flatter and smile at fellas. And I'm not going to do more than my fair share of emotional labor in relationships with fellas. And that feels quite often to fellas as though you're being misandrist just because you're treating a fella like a fella would treat a fella.
Yeah.
And I think that's the first message, is that in this movement, you're going to encounter a lot of women who are angry and boundaried, and none of us have got any time for your shit, really.
Yeah.
So what you have to do about it, if you're going to stick around, is you have to grow a thick skin, and you have to grow a thick skin quickly. Don't expect any medals. Don't expect anybody to shut up, listen, give you a leading role.
Yeah.
And expect our loyalties to be to women first. I mean, I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you're asking these questions, because we do need men. We need men because there's people that can't hear women, for example. But we've got work to do. Like, we've got a job of our own to do, and we are going to, some of us are going to exclude men entirely from our activism. Some of us are going to exclude heterosexual men, and none of us are going to give you any medals.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely an observation I've made and have not been as great on, probably myself, in terms of getting into longer discussions on Twitter. And I'm coming at it from we're just having a conversation, and then realizing actually, no, that's not been helpful at all, James. But I think the stuff I've observed is there's definitely an expectation from some men of like coming in and trying to fix everything. I know that's how I am at work. It's like, that's my job at work, is what's wrong? How do we fix it? And being very that kind of focus without taking into account everything that's already happening and has been, you know, women who've been working on this for a long while. I think the other bit, particularly in terms of gay men, is recognizing that, a bit like we were saying kind of in intro about the gender issues do affect the LGB community or population and affect gay men, and there's issues there. And then, but majority of this is it's a women's issue, and it's recognizing it's the standing with and standing behind to support, not trying to stand in front. And yeah, gay men lead on a gay men's thing, but recognize the bulk of this in terms of the impact is on women.
Yeah. And then, I mean, there's a line to be drawn, isn't there?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're talking about using the respect and leverage that you have just by virtue of being a man on the one hand, and then like on the other hand, not white knighting, not coming in, sweeping in, I know all the answers, I've been here for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Behold, a man has arrived. And just my eyes roll. I'm just like, just stop it. Do you know? It's and it's trying to find that balance.
Yeah.
Like not swooping in. Because I mean, let's be honest, the women in this movement are less in need of rescue than any women I've ever met.
Yes.
But then at the same time, we need the support. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that kind of
That's difficult.
line or balance. I think we've said it now, where this is part we were chatting before recording about the perception men. I'm using very much generalizations of society here, obviously stereotyping slightly, but the perceptions that a lot of men or most men will have because of society's portrayal or curation of what a woman should be like, and the damsel in distress, and there's a respectful men giving up their seat for women type societal thing that's kind of a respect, and that's come from a traditional place, but then it's the where that not oversteps but kind of overbalances into the women can't do stuff for themselves and men need to come in and do it. And obviously that's not A, not the case, and B, not helpful.
Yeah. And I mean, as a man, you've been socialized to feel that if women are talking for 50% of the time, then they're dominating the conversation.
Yeah.
Like you've been socialized, we've all been socialized, like we've all got expectations, and trying to overcome some of those expectations involves for women taking up more space.
Yes.
But it involves for men taking up less.
Yes. It's like it makes me think of the Ruth Bader Ginsburg quote about how many women should be on the Supreme Court, or how many too many. I can't remember the phrasing of it, but it was like, when it's all of them, because it was all men, so why shouldn't it be all women? The whole there's an easy, almost statistical, particularly in the workplace, quotas kind of everything's 50-50. That's kind of what we're aiming for, but it's almost that's still almost looking at women as a second level group in bringing them up to where men are, and that's the norm. I think that's the societal benchmarking, is how do we get women to be the same as men, rather than recognizing that they are two different groups and there's equal but different groups. Like all the crash test dummies are all male sized, averaged. Like the world is built for male bodied averages, and it's kind of women are seen as like a comparative to men, and that's very much not even consciously how the world is. Most people aren't conscious of that is how the world is built and operates. And yeah, I think that's going to be the surprising thing for a lot of men will be they won't think they think like this. They won't be aware that that's stuff that's probably subconscious because of how, for the most part, that's how they've interacted with the world. I think that's, I don't know if you've seen, well, you've actually, what you've already said kind of touched on it in terms of the interactions on Twitter, and the people come in not even having thought about having to think about these sorts of things.
And take up space, just sort of take up space and suck all the air out of the room.
Yeah.
And if you address it, well, the worst example was recently was a friend of mine did a thread about how wonderful women are and women's bodies are, and how great being a lesbian is. And just for a wee short while, that thread was full of lesbian women talking about how great being a lesbian is. It was lovely. It was like a lesbian bar opened on Twitter in this little space.
Yeah.
And then by morning, the whole thread was full of blokes commenting how hot it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, go away. She had to delete it because it was just grim. Like,
yeah. And I think that's not. I've talked on another video about, I used to run a gay speed dating event and networking events for gay professionals, and was working with or in contact with a lesbian couple who are running the same thing for lesbians, and we're talking about doing a speed dating type event for them with our format. But they talked about running networking events that were for lesbians, and men just bought tickets and turned up. Like just assumption that
they do like. Can I just say, like, men can't be lesbians? Like, can I just say that? Because it is a whole thing that they think they can. They think, oh, like a terrible Bird and Manning joke. Like, men can be lesbians. No, you can't. Like, there is nothing in common between me and some fella who puts on a dress and thinks that lesbians are hot. Like,
yes.
And if you're having sex with somebody with a penis, that's not lesbian sex.
Yes, it is. Again, it's another the bizarre state of the world that the obvious needs stating.
Yeah, my ex-boyfriend, when I was 19 years old, I came out to him as a lesbian. I said, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. I'm a lesbian. Like, this isn't for me. And he said, what luck, me too. You know, and I stayed with him for another 3 months trying to convince myself that this was all right with me. Like, and we're just socialized. This is the trouble. We're socialized to put up with it. I think whilst we're on what women want, we were talking about thick skin and being like aware of how you take up space. What women really want is that you don't sort of wade into it and then take the strops. So I follow so many fellas on Twitter, and you as well, James. Like, I follow you, so many fellas, but every single fella that I follow, I do it with my finger hovering above the unfollow button, waiting for when male entitlement kicks in. They have a strop and go full on MRA, like start talking about how terrible women are and how misandrous the movement is, as if misandry was actually a thing. And like, even people who I think well of, like Duncan Henry, Mr. Menno, even people like that, you seem unlikely to exhibit this sort of behavior, but still my fingers like hovering over that button, because so many women have been burned by it so many times in this movement. And there's this sense of unease and distrust, and that isn't necessarily a comment on individual fellas. So don't do that. First of all, please don't do that. I like you too much for you to do that. But if you see any of your peers doing this, please just tell them to stop it. Like, make them not do that anymore, because the more women say to them, like, stop it, the more their backs go up. But like, please just hold that space if you possibly can and make them not. That will be good.
I know I've done that. Like, I've had whole conversations that I've then deleted and realizing that's not helpful, because I've kind of felt like we're getting into a debate and it's two opposing views, and this is not a healthy debate. Probably it's Twitter. I don't think there are healthy debates on Twitter, but it's kind of that, and actually it's then realizing that's not really gone anywhere or been helpful for anyone, and kind of missing the point, and then kind of gone back and deleted, or I've DM'd someone and been like, that's not, essentially apologizing in a, I want to be able to have, and I think it is useful to have that debate, and I think that's particularly between men and women, because that generally doesn't happen. I can't speak for straight men, but my understanding of most straight men is that most of their friends are male. Most of my friends are gay men or women as well, to a certain degree. Not that the women are women to a certain degree. Obviously, the women are women. But that, as bad for it as Twitter is, I think it is useful to be able to have discussions where people don't understand each other, to try and understand each other. I think that's the thing that the gender ideology side of the debate doesn't have or want to have, whereas our side is recognizing that we don't all agree and actually we can talk. Like you're saying, it's that the way you can go about that is,
and I think there's also there's an element as well of when people arrive in the debate, they think that nobody has ever said the things that they're saying before, and then it's on us to kind of educate them. If you want to join in this debate and understand it from women's perspective, Dr. Jane Clare Jones has a course. Please, for the love of God, go and take it. Like, Basics of Feminism online, go and take that, and that'll be really helpful as like a starting point. Pay your entry to the, and you don't even have to pay for it, it's free.
I think that's a good, as I say, I've had kind of new people arrive, or when I've been talking to people who haven't heard as much about it, and I've kind of got a list of book linked YouTube videos from different people, either interviews or talks from different people, like start here, do these, then read this list of books. And it's kind of like, and again, that's something that we want people to be informed. That's the whole, well, not the whole, but that's like one of the key issues, is that this has become this debate has become an issue because people aren't informed and have just gone along with stuff. So actually, the more people can, it's great that people kind of peak and kind of want to get involved and understand more, but actually there's lots out there. Like, I was going to say educate yourself, that's a horrible woke expression, but you know what I mean, is that it's not
no,
that
actually educate yourself. Like,
it's not that content isn't there. Like, you can do the research and understand, because then you make a more valuable contribution to kind of supporting and understanding.
Yeah, and yeah, so we mentioned taking up space and how to support and understand and how to do that online. I think being aware of other things and how they come across as well. So, for example, I have a thing on my Twitter that says, "Don't DM me if you're a bloke unless you ask first." And the reason I have this is that my DMs, I have them open because survivors message me and I need to hear from them and they need to be able to speak to me. And that's why my DMs are open. But every week I get a dick pic. Every month, probably, I get either an adult baby picture or "will you be my mummy" or whatever. Or I get some transbian who wants me to do whatever. I've had death threats. I've had pictures of the front of my house. Every day, practically, I get some fella say, "Hi, hello, hi, how are you doing, beautiful lady?"
Yeah.
Fuck off, like, get out of my inbox.
Yeah.
And so I say to fellas, don't message me unless you've got prior permission on big Twitter.
Yeah.
But I think it's, generally speaking, a good rule for fellas. Don't DM people unless you ask them first on Twitter.
Yeah.
Like,
I'm just thinking about the translation, or what a potential translation of that is, that gay men, or some gay men, will get in terms of the if you're on somewhere like Grindr or Scruff or whatever app, and you keep getting a message from someone you're just not interested in, it's that, but not just an annoying thing, it's got an ominous, dangerous like aspect to it. So it's kind of, imagine that, but
the fella's a foot taller than you.
Yeah. And it's
He's
in
a foot taller than you and built like the
right.
side of a barn. And he just won't leave you alone. And it's not just one of these fellas who's a foot taller than you and the size of a barn. There's like 50 of them.
Yeah.
And it's every day.
Yeah.
Like, it's a lot. Like, it's a lot. But I have to keep my inbox open because I have to be able to talk to survivors who want to message me. Yeah. So I just, whatever, block, get rid of it.
Yeah.
So be aware of how you come over online. But actually, and I'm going to say this about taking up space again, be aware of how you come over in everyday life as well. Because many men have been socialized properly, and many men are aware of the fact that they take up physical space, and that women find men imposing and threatening. For example, if you're walking down the street at night and you're walking behind a woman, there are ways to signal like she is safe. So you cross the street, you know, and you speed up and go past her.
Yeah.
And just like pretend she doesn't exist. Don't just keep walking behind her. Yeah. If you are in a room with a woman, don't position yourself between her and the door and leave the door open. Like, really just basic things that take account of the fact that you have a physical presence that makes some women in the world feel certain ways, possibly because of things that they've gone through, and possibly just because that's how they feel, because it's rational to feel like that, given what we all know about the statistics.
I think that's an important bit that some men don't get, and I've just said some, like, it's that it's not all men and it's not all women. When we're talking about this, it's because it's either statistically this is where it happens, or the likelihood is this, or women don't know which men are the rapists. It's like, we're not saying all women are going to think like this and all men are this this thing. It is either, you know, we're talking about population norm, or we're talking about it's an unknown and therefore it's more of a risk to women than men. And I think that's a difficulty that some men don't get. Or the thing they'll jump on is the, yeah, but it's not this specific thing, and it's like that's not the point of what the explanation's about.
I think, to take further your grinder metaphor, if you imagine a world where half the population were gay men who were a foot taller and broad across the shoulders, and percentage of them were predatory towards the smaller, weaker heterosexual males, it's rational to be cautious. And if you were one of the good guys amongst the taller gay males, you would take care to signal that you were safe to be around.
Yeah. I think for gay men, I mean, there will be a proportion of gay men. I mean, a lot of gay men who will have been like bullied as kids or felt at risk in certain situations. So it's thinking like in that kind of like I've been sat at a bus stop and someone's let a firework off and it's kids messing around, and it's like central London, and then you just don't know. And it's so there are they're not equivalent, but they're kind of examples of things that gay men who've been through that sort of thing should be able to draw on. Imagine it like you can put yourself in this situation and then multiply that by 20 kind of thing. It's that it shouldn't be impossible to do that.
I actually think that quite a lot of that stuff ties in with dysphoria. I think a lot of young girls develop dysphoria because of those feelings about their bodies. It almost feels like a betrayal. So when I was little, I could climb all the trees and fight the boys with sticks and like do all that stuff. And then all of a sudden, they're bigger than me and stronger than me, and it almost feels like a betrayal in some ways, and you have to kind of get used to it. And I did, and kind of grew out of it, and Lauren didn't. Tonight. So I guess that's the stuff about tone and about how to be in a space. So on to substantive issues. This might be where it gets controversial for the fellas.
Right. I'll play devil's advocate for you if you need to, and kind of like unpack it, because I'm really keen that this isn't just a presentation of a list. This is a conversation. So if there's stuff, even if I know what you mean, I'll ask you stuff so we can kind of really, really drive it home.
Yeah, just let's do it then. So the first and foremost thing for me, men, please, for the love of God, stop giving away women's rights because you feel sorry for or uncomfortable about feminine men. Just don't. Like, how many men in this debate have I seen saying, oh, surely post-operative trans women should be allowed in the women's toilets? Like, what? Like, just because you don't want them in your spaces, it doesn't mean that you get to palm that problem off onto women because it's a men's problem and it's up to men to sort it out. Like, I don't want anything to do with it. The risks of male violence are too great, and they're not erased or reduced by giving hormones and surgeries to men. And there are arguments against it, I guess. So you say, oh, if you pass, you should use the toilet pertaining to your gender, not your sex. And like, trans people have been using the toilets they want to for years and all that stuff.
I think whenever anyone's brought out the toilet thing for me, with conversations with me, I was like, that's kind of a red herring, because the change has been, yes, transsexual people, as we would have referred to them before the gender thing took in, would have been using whatever toilet. And for the most part, or the difference is that if a trans identifying male, post-operative or otherwise, used the women's toilets in the past, apart from that, it's only a very small number of people. The point is that they weren't doing it to go in and get their dick out and take a photo and brag about it online. It wasn't about doing it to invade a woman's space. They were and they were most likely to be unnoticed. The reality is we can't police who goes into the toilet because we've got too many toilets, and we're not recommending genital inspections at the door. Like, the practicalities of it is actually, but in the same way that we shouldn't drive over the speed limit. And for most of the time, most of us don't. We don't have to have that enforced to do. So I think that using the toilets based on your sex is something you should be able to do without any kind of enforcement. It's not something we can police. And actually, it's a big red herring, because that's it's used as the example because actually people, I think, on the kind of gender side of the debate know that that can't be policed and isn't really the issue, but then they use that for the people who don't really know, because it's easier for them to say that than to explain why they think a male person should be in a female prison or in sports, because that's, that is a policeable and obvious what the harm is and those sorts of things. So I think the toilets bit, I will always refute to people who are presenting that, well, why can't they just want to pee? I'm like, complete red herring. Like, focus on the actual.
They don't want to pee. If anybody thinks they just want to pee, then I would say to them, not that I would ever recommend a particular porn site, but go onto a porn site and search women's toilets.
Yeah. If
you want to argue that, like, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of videos. The other point is that the argument, oh, well, we've been using your toilets for years, is not the knockdown argument that you think it is. Like, we don't want you in our spaces. Oh, but we've been in them for years without your say so. Like, that's not a knockdown argument. That's just,
and that's the reality, the practicalities of it. It's not a justification for, oh, well, that's okay then.
Yeah. So look, my thing about this is, if you're a fella in this debate, I'm looking for you to be advocating for a women's protected space and an open space. So take the problem off our hands, please. Say we're going to move over. We're going to get more comfortable with feminine men in our spaces. We're going to be fine if trans men want to come into our spaces. Like, that's all right. That's how to do it. Like,
it is. I mean, again, it's a slight looking retrospectively at how this has evolved, but it's kind of there is a take that's how did this become a women's issue? Like you say, it's about men being uncomfortable with effeminate men, and then it's like, oh, and that again, this is how I want gay men particularly to understand what's going on, because actually dealing with that is a men's issue.
It's a men's issue. And I mean, if you want to white knight, if white knighting is your whole thing, I'm really happy for you to swoop in and say, on your white charger, your noble steed with your lance, and say, my arms are open, come into men's spaces, trans men, feminine men, and all that. And it's not about demonizing feminine men or saying that they're a danger or anything like that. It's just that we know many of us know firsthand what danger men pose in those spaces, and that doesn't change if you take hormones and have surgeries.
I think there's a conflation. I was talking to, I had another Lib Dem canvasser yesterday. I had a long chat with him at the door, and explained to him the trans umbrella. And it's like, kids with gender dysphoria are not the same as middle-aged men with a cross-dressing fetish. And there's again, this is a thing that men need to understand in the broader thing, but in terms of the danger to women part of it is obviously the LGB men end of that spectrum of what's included under that umbrella. But for straight men, I think there's an element of the homophobia part, and that's the thing I want gay men to get as well, is this kind of reluctance to address or accept or deal with effeminate men, for want of a better word. That there's a homophobia that's driving that from straight men.
Yeah, and so you kind of, I mean, what is it? Is it like going out of our spaces and into women's spaces that they're doing when they say, oh, surely post-operative trans? What is actually going on there?
I don't know. I think I shall find some straight men to interview as well, really. I think I would suspect there's an element of it's not my problem, I'm going to deal with it thing, not seeing it even as that. There's an element for some that will be if we get into that, then there's a risk of what we addressing homosexuals exist, and we don't want to talk about that. I think I think that for men, in terms of the men who identify as women in men's spaces, it's easier for them to let it be a woman's problem. I think also there's a different driver for the men identifying as women concerned, there's an amount of, we want the validation of being seen as women, and therefore there's a driver for wanting to be in the women's space as opposed to wanting to be in the male space.
I mean, it's not what women's toilets are for, validating male identities. Like, so, I mean, I think, yeah. So I'm glad about that better conversation. That's all right. But hopefully just that your audience can hear that if you want to white knight, do it by moving over and making space for everybody who wants to be in male spaces instead of palming the problem off on us.
Yeah.
So what else am I going to say? Let's see what I got on my list. Oh, here we go. This one's not going to be popular with the straight fellas, but I'm going to say it anyway. If you are currently jacking off to video recordings of abused women being re-abused on camera for money, just stop it. Yeah. Like, seriously, you'll feel better. The women in your life will feel better around you, and your willy will work better. Yeah. Do you know, you'll lose any erectile dysfunction you've got. And your real life sex will be better too, because you won't have a parade of like drugged up, trafficked women going through your brain instead of the actual real life woman that you're with. Yeah. Stop it. Tell your mates to stop it. Yeah. And I don't actually care about porn that only involves fellas. It's not my issue. It's not my area. But leave women and children out of it.
The two things that it makes me think of, one is there's definitely, I can't think here, and I'll try and find and put in description, but there will be, or if anyone knows any, put them in comments. I've definitely read the kind of essays from straight men who have talked about they stopping using porn and like how much better they feel for that. Particularly the kind of porn you're just describing. I think that the interesting. I probably need to find a gay man and have a video conversation about this particularly, because I'm giving it a massive amount of thought. But I think there's a difference in terms of gay men's perception of porn, because kind of men and sex is different. Like the perception of like I've talked loads in the past about people explaining that it's not that gay men have more sex because they're gay; they have more sex because they're men. Like both of them can be up for it, and then like the randomness and all that kind of stuff. It's not a sexuality thing, it's because they're males, and that's a different type of sex drive on population level stuff. So I think, and there's a lot of increasingly over the last, I guess, 5 or 10 years, the homemade stuff and the young guys like videoing stuff and putting it online. There's a gay porn has a not that it's not damaging, and there are, particularly when drugs are involved, and I know of people who are in production, some of the main production things in the UK, talking about the route into drugs that men who've been in those videos kind of ended up. But it's a different kind of it's a different kind of not reasoning for being there, but like it's less the kind of issues that are facing women who are in porn are not there in the same way or at all for gay men who are typically in porn. So I think that's the thing that gay men don't appreciate. It's actually, if you go and, again, not wanting to recommend any porn sites, but if you go and look at I can't remember whose essay or thread talked about stuff and linked to some stuff, and it's like I don't think gay men have watched a lot of straight porn, obviously.
And if you do, so I know a gay man who has, and if you do watch it as a gay man, you generally find it quite like harrowing how the women are treated in it. I mean, speaking from my own personal experience, I was first exposed to pornography when I was 7 years old, and then regularly throughout my childhood, and it just became a habit. So I was watching porn for like 10 years before I had the first orgasm. Like, my childhood was crazy, but then it was a habit for me. And it got in my brain and it fucked me up basically. And I made a decision as an adult that I was actually just going to stop. I was just going to stop watching it because I wanted to be with the person I was with. And within weeks of stopping it, I realized I was just a lesbian. I wasn't bisexual at all. I was just a lesbian.
Yeah.
And then within months of stopping it, I was able to be in the room again, like properly, not again, even just be in the room.
Yeah.
And it's just the best thing that I ever did for my sex life is giving it up.
I don't think most men will realize that the type of the addictiveness of porn, it's the same as it's the always looking for something new, and you can just click through to the next thing, and it's almost the rush, the hit you get from like the red dot coming up, or getting notifications. It's all that kind of particularly online element of this. It's that feeding the, not necessarily a porn addiction, but it's that kind of addictive relationship, something that becomes a
But
habit.
it builds, I mean, neurologically, it builds like a highway.
Yeah.
And those neurons, you do the same thing again and again, and you end up with a pleasure reward thing at the end of it. And you stop caring about exactly what it is that gets you there. And then because those two things have been associated so often, when you're actually really with a person, then it messes it up. And I mean, that's just being on the receiving end of it. The fact that happy, stable, contented women don't go into porn. You know, it's abused women being re-abused on camera for money. And if you think about it like that, it gets more difficult to watch it and to want to masturbate to it. Like,
yeah.
So yeah, that's porn. I'm gonna get more controversial on that as we go. I'm getting more and more controversial, so like people can switch off when they're like when they get tired of hearing that all time. Right, you ready?
Yeah.
Gay men, if you want to have children, please adopt or have a co-parenting relationship with a lesbian couple.
Yeah.
Do something that doesn't involve renting the inside of a woman's body for 9 months and then taking the child from her that she's carried.
Yeah.
Like, and people say to me, well, isn't that like it's homophobic because you have children and you're in a lesbian couple, like you're raising fatherless children, air quotes. But actually, throughout the whole of human history, there have been women who've been raising fatherless children and women who've got together in groups to raise their children. Like Lauren was raised by a group of women, all of whose husbands left. But there's just no point in human history where buying a baby from the woman who carried it was seen as a moral good.
Yeah. And I think the reaction that the particularly rainbow mafia types and kind of anyone else who's trying to be virtuous and virtue signal is you can't tell gay men they can't have children. So we're not saying gay men can't have children or gay men can't be can't be fathers. That isn't what's being said. And I think that's what I've observed as being the sticking point on this, is that the people who seem, I mean, there are people who are just pro surrogacy generally, but I think particularly who haven't really looked into it or seen the nuance in stuff, is that they see it as being you're being homophobic because you're saying gay men can't be fathers. It's like, no, that's not it at all. Obviously gay men can be fathers. It's about, like you say, you're renting a woman's body for 9 months, and that's not a good thing.
It's not a good thing. And if you can't get your head around it from an empathy point of view, for the fact it's mainly women who are poor, so it's rich men renting the bodies of poor women. James Barry on Twitter called it gestitution, which I rather liked. If you can't get your head around that, just pause for a moment and think, you're going to have to sit down with this child and explain to them where they came from.
Yeah. And like you say, it's another thing where people kind of give an individual specific example of, oh, but she, the woman wanted to do this. And it's like, well, if it's someone like I have no intention of having children now, but in the past with a previous partner had the conversation, had looked at surrogacy. I've had female friends long time ago, well before I'd even thought about having children, who kind of, not in any kind of let's plan this kind of way, but she wasn't with anyone, wanted children. So we kind of, in a broader conversation about what co-parenting might be, if you've got women in your life who you can have that. I mean, there's lots of kind of gay male couple, lesbian female couple, co-parent. that works. And it's about, like you say, that's the relationship that child's going to have with their parents. Not all children are going to have a relationship with both of their biological parents. If they can, that's great, but it's more, how do you explain where, how do you set that child down and explain later life?
I wouldn't want to do that. Like, we put so much thought into it before we had children. And my children knew how they were conceived before anybody else in my life knew how they were conceived. Like, we just didn't tell a person because we felt like it was their information, not anybody else's. Like, we didn't even tell my parents, we didn't tell my best friends, because it's their information, and we didn't want them to feel like everybody knew, and they didn't. And we explained it all to them from when they were very young. And we put everything in place to find a balance between them being able to contact the donor when they're older, and us not having complicated legal things when they're younger. And just put so much thought into how we did it. But I don't understand how somebody could sit down and have the kind of thinking process that we had, and then arrive at the conclusion that surrogacy was a good idea. Because you have to think about how these children are going to feel about the process of it. Like, their mother was willing to give them up at point of birth for a cash payment. Like, how do you explain that to a child?
I think there's an element of gay men can't get pregnant accidentally. Like, there's a whole, I've had these conversations, or almost joking about it with people in the past. Is like, and actually, even whether you're a lesbian couple or a gay couple, like, there's an amount of planning that has to happen. This isn't something that is a surprise baby that you then have to, like, lots of people are surprise babies and people cope with that. That's not a bad thing to be, but you have to have gone through a thought process of how you're going to arrive at having children if you are in a same-sex couple. So to have had that thought process, and to have arrived at, we'll just buy one, kind of almost thinking. I don't think it's, this is slightly devil's advocate and slightly knowing where my thinking has been more than a decade ago. I don't think there's a inherently or automatically I don't really care about the woman driving that. It's I haven't even thought about it, which in itself is a lack of care. But it's the lack of thought that is as much of the problem.
If you want to know how much anybody cares about the actual surrogates, just have a look on some of the websites of the Ukrainian, because so Ukraine is like a center for surrogacy, because the laws say that the intended surrogate parents go on the birth certificate, which makes it easier. But if you go on the websites of these companies in Ukraine, they're all like, no, your surrogates are safe. We're looking after you, like, your surrogates are safe. You're going to get your baby. We're still doing procedures. The show must go on. Like, there's no let up at all for the fact that the country's actually at war. It's all about, no, we're going to have these babies to sell.
And it's reflective of, and I say this as someone who doesn't have children and has no intention to have children, so it's easy to say, but I think it's reflective of a societal, not even expectation, but kind of everyone has the right to a family life. Obviously, there's human rights legally, but I don't think anyone has the right to have children. Like, it's not a thing that you are entitled to. It's not. So there's a right to family life, but you don't have an entitlement to have children.
That's one of these clinics in Ukraine has a thing up that says there's no absolute infertility, which sounds very close to me. Like, you have a right to have children. Crackers. So that's surrogacy. Just think about it, please, on surrogacy. And now I'm going to get really controversial, fellas. So
I'll look at the stats as to kind of where the drop-off comes if people are watching the video.
I know. So the next thing is drag, right? Back in the day, I've been to drag shows in gay places, so they were still misogynist back then. The drag was still misogynist, and they used to talk about fish and call each other bitch and girlfriend and all that. But At the same time, those spaces were held, the security was butch lesbians.
Mhm.
The butch lesbians policed the space, they held the space.
Yeah.
And I mean, there was one occasion where I saw a drag act who started calling women's genitalia like stinking, sopping clams and being like really outrageously horrible to women.
Yeah.
And the butch bouncer just told him to rein it in, and he did.
Yeah.
So in those spaces where they're held and made safe by butch lesbians,
Mhm.
and the gay men know that you don't take those women on,
Yeah.
and they rein it in when they're told to, okay, you know, it is what it is. It's a bit of history. It's a misogynist, adult, sexualized art form. That's just what it is. In gay male only spaces, I don't mind at all whatever anybody does. Like, it's none of my business at all.
Mm.
Like, carry on, do drag if you want to. But I always feel like once you bring drag out of those spaces,
Mhm.
once you put it in a place where it's not policed by butch lesbians, you
Yeah.
put it on the telly and give them free reign.
Mhm.
You take it into primary schools.
Yeah.
You have straight men doing it. You just once you start doing all that, then it changes its meaning and it becomes something else. And women can't stand it. And it depends on degrading women in those spaces in a way that the meaning changes.
Yeah.
The meaning it has in gay spaces.
Yeah.
So please, men, will you stop defending drag as an art form,
Yeah.
as if it isn't going into primary schools, and if
Yeah.
it isn't taking over straight spaces.
Yeah.
In primary schools, it's just pure grooming, and in straight spaces, it's just pure misogyny. Like,
Yeah.
just don't defend it.
Yeah. So I've drag's come up in a couple of the conversations I've had. I know it's going to come up in some others, and that's one of the distinctions you just kind of touched on that I've made with someone. In at least one of them is what drag has been in the past in terms of it's a theatrical performance. It's playing a character. It's, you know, pantomime, both for men and women playing the opposite sex, because there's a theatrical performance history to it that formed part of drag and an art form. That's not what drag is or includes. In the same way, the trans umbrella's got this really broad thing. What comes under the umbrella of drag now, in terms of the popular culture with things like RuPaul's Drag Race, and it's a drag at that end, I think, falls more under the trans umbrella stuff. It's not putting on a character performing. It is, particularly as there's quite a few of the RuPaul's Drag Race contestants who've then gone on to come out as, or even gone in as, identifying as trans. And then that's a very narrow view of drag. And as people who are within the drag world, you've commented on, RuPaul's Drag Race is not what drag is, but that's what is on telly. So that's what people think it is. And that's it's not the same thing. I think there's also the misogyny bit, even with the, you know, drag queen in a gay pub, or as a performance bit, as much with the content. Like, if a person not in drag was telling those jokes or being that way, that would still be misogynist. It's not because it's in and of itself. It's not because it's a drag queen performing it. If you're doing misogynistic material, that's not right, whoever's doing it. But like you say, if it's in that space where you've got butch lesbians kind of maintaining that boundary of what's appropriate and, you know, doing that, that's a very different thing than slapping it on the telly and parading it as stunning and brave. And or the drag kids thing, is it Netflix that's doing a series, or someone's doing a series on the drag kids thing, and it's like, as you know, the little gay boy who likes to dress up, great, that would be, you know, for kids who want to do that, boys should be able to dress up as princesses and do whatever they want. Putting that in a TV show and making them up in an adult drag performer, which is a sexualized clown telling jokes type,
It's
you know.
grooming.
Yeah.
It's grooming, flat out grooming.
And I don't think the people who are supporting it understand that. They think they're supporting little gay boys who can be whatever they want, and it's like, great, but you're not understanding where this sits within the context and what the implications of this are in terms of what this means. It's as a form of grooming and the eroding of the boundaries of sexual reality of sex and those sorts of things.
And I mean, I think the other thing as well with kids, you've just got to let them be kids.
Mm.
Like, I don't think it really makes sense to talk about children being gay. I mean, I knew when I was quite young
Yeah,
what I was. Like, I think I was probably less than 10 when I met my first butch lesbian.
yeah.
And I can still see everything she was wearing.
Mm.
She was standing at a stall and selling things. I don't know what she was selling. I couldn't tell you because like she was just everything in the whole world to me. And she did that thing that butch lesbians do. And she took me seriously. And I had a million questions about every single thing on that stand. And she just like made a space for me, listened to me. And nobody had ever done something like that in my whole life before. And I think my mother after that spent the whole of the rest of my childhood warning me off women like that because
Yeah,
they get me in trouble. So I think my mum knew about me from quite a young age. And I think I knew from quite a young age. But at the same time, it wouldn't have made sense to say that I was a lesbian or even a baby lesbian. Like I feel like kids are just kids and you just leave them alone to
yeah,
work themselves
yeah.
out. I
I
mean,
think
I've got a kid who he's 9 now and he's fabulous. He's just creative and wonderful and just his signature moves are prancing and squealing and he likes to wear my shoes and he likes to wear Lauren's shoes and he's just who he is and we just accept him as he is. And it's kind of creepy to speculate about somebody's future sexuality when they're 9.
yeah, I think it's because I think so many people, there's that trope of, your mother always knows. As an adult, everyone's kind of looking back, everybody could tell. But obviously there are people that looking back you would have thought might grow up to be gay that don't. And I think there's almost a wanting to be accepting of what the future is going to be, to not too early, but do you know what I mean? Like thinking about it before and because the default is we assume everyone's going to grow up to be straight, that if we think they might not, that then becomes a point of conversation. Noticing that, kids are gender conforming isn't a point of conversation because why would it be? And I think that so yeah, it comes up almost artificially because of that. But then the difference is that you can grow up to be gay. You're not inherently trans. Like
Yeah.
it's not the same thing. I think that's the lumping together, particularly like with the drag kids thing. It's the trying to be accepting of boys who are going to grow up to be gay, but it's being painted over with this inclusion without exception or whatever the Stonewall language is,
Yeah.
groomingness, and it's a different thing and it's creepy. Kids doing drag is creepy. Kids dressing up, fine. Kids doing drag is creepy. Not because of the kids, because of the adults enabling it.
Mm-hmm. Although, I mean, there is sort of an expectation you grow up straight, but my 14-year-old hilariously sat me down and came out to me as straight. Mom, I've got something to tell you, Mom. So, hope's all right. It's very so yeah, drag kids, just please don't do drag kids, don't do trans kids, don't do gay kids, just let kids be kids and work themselves out.
Yeah.
And I think how are we doing on my list? I think that's a lot of my list. This bit here, have we talked about socialization? Yes, we have. We talked about that bit. We've talked about not jumping in on conversations. We talked about what to use your knowledge for. I think we've covered most of the list,
Cool.
That would be it.
So
Yeah, but it's about how you take up space. And essentially, to put all of that into a nutshell, women are socialized to take up less space and men are socialized to take up more space.
yeah.
And overcoming that and doing better, terrible woke phrase, doing better. But if you want to do better as a woman, you have to learn to take up more space.
Yeah.
And if you want to do better as a man, you have to learn to take up less space. And that's not an easy thing for fellas to hear, and especially not from a woman.
Yeah.
But
well, I think I was thinking this actually when you were first talking about that, but it kind of reminds me thinking of a gay male audience, and particularly if you were a feminine child or teen. So I knew going probably well into my 20s, that I was very self-conscious and like both of my voice and physicality, and not trying to take up less space, but I wasn't, like, I'm naturally introverted. I wasn't going to be, out there making loud noise. So there's a couple of things at university in terms of the, like, being asked to speak up in a room when talking to a group, and it's like the crushing embarrassment of that, because it's like everyone knows that I'm not speaking up, and now, like, so I think if you were that kind of quiet gay boy, kind of, to use a stereotypical description, like I actively had to make myself extroverted at work, particularly going into management type roles, and kind of it's not a false confidence, but it's an outward performance of a, being at work kind of thing. So I think I'm very conscious that I will talk over people, because I've trained myself to say what I'm saying with people at work, and whoever stops talking first is the one who lets the other one talk. It's not quite as blunt as that, but it's something that, even though I know I can do that, I'm aware of doing that. So I've mostly had female bosses, and I've preferred when I've had women as bosses. It might have been the men I've had whose bosses were not always great, but just being really conscious of I know I will keep talking. Like, I learned to drive in a people carrier, so if it's a narrow, like, only room for one car, I got used to the other car's going to stop because I'm in a people carrier with a bull bar on the front. So I think if men, whether you've trained yourself to be more, not outgoing or extrovert because of how you have been, or whether you just naturally are, and then the world both allows you to do that and expects you to do that, that becomes your default. So I think being really conscious of, even if you know that's how you are, even if you are in a workplace or an industry where it requires you to be like that, it's being really aware of, are other people not talking because you're not letting them, or like why, understanding why that is, and not just charging on regardless.
And if you do want to charge on, then you have like full permission to go and charge on. For example, if you're at work and there's other fellas there and they're being disgusting about women, go ahead and charge on, talk over them all you like, and tell them. I mean, and fellas say to me, "Oh, I don't want to do that because of the way I'll be perceived."
Yeah.
My wife Lauren is butch enough that when she's at work in her all-male environment, the fellas sometimes forget that she's a woman and forget to moderate how they speak about women in front of her.
Yeah.
And if she, as a woman in an all-male environment, can speak up and say, "Lads, that's disgusting," like, don't say that about women. That's what kind of way is that to talk about a woman? Like, if she can do that and still be accepted in an all-male environment, you as a man definitely can do that. And if you want to talk over people, go and talk over some fellas. There's loads of fellas to talk over.
Yeah, but I think a lot of men will respect men more. They may not say stuff at work. If someone calls stuff out, they may not even consciously perceive it. But I would like to think more men will even subconsciously register that as, that person stood up for the right thing, than he's been a bit of a dick calling that out. Like, do you know what I mean? It's, I know my other half has called stuff out at work. He's worked in, like, maintenance and building, kind of very laddie type workspaces, and I think it's easy for men to kind of think it's almost the bravado thing. I'm assuming what straight men are like, mostly straight men, that go, the banter stuff, and it's very easy to, and that's a not performance exactly, but I think that's going along with it because you're in an all male or mostly male environment.
That word banter is quite a telling one. So if you go to employment tribunals and use the word banter, or it was just banter, then you've basically lost the case, because employment tribunals know that banter is code for serious sexual harassment.
And even just the way you said it, I think it's just banter. Like, in the past, like, that's how you talk. That's the description of two presenters talking about stuff, commentating on a thing. That's commentary and banter between them. That's what that word has meant, because it's used to minimize things that are actually wrong. Oh, it's just banter. It's like, well, no, it's not just banter. It's harassment, or it's whatever else you go to tribunal for. So yeah, I think more men, or I'd like to think more men would be, if not appreciative, feel positively that someone has called something out, than feel negatively about the person who's called it out, even if they don't say that.
I hope so. Like, I hope so. I mean, I'm not a misandrist. There's fellas, well, even if there was such a thing as a misandrist, but fellas in my life have been a very negative force. But there are fellas in my life now who are a very positive force. My therapist is a fella, and he sees his job, I think, mostly to embolden me and like tell me take up more space, like be who you are and all this. My lawyer's a great bloke. He hilariously refuses to call me Ceri after he saw my speech in Belfast, because he says he doesn't want to get on my wrong side, so he calls me Dr. Black.
Yeah.
He emboldens me. There are other fellas in this movement who've said exactly the right thing to me, exactly the right moment, and made me brave. And I mean, I'm raising fellas, and we need to have these conversations. I honestly, part of it, because my son's 14 now and is just learning to navigate the world on a system running on with testosterone in it.
Yeah.
And it's a hell of a drug. Testosterone's a hell of a drug. Like, I'm learning this firsthand at the moment.
Yeah.
And I feel as if a lot of the stuff that fellas do that is so annoying, if somebody had spoken to them when they were 14, then they wouldn't be doing the annoying things.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh.
It's there's the Simpsons episode where there's a different judge and Bart and Homer get sentenced because they can't get away with it with the normal judge. And towards the end, like when the other judge comes back, it's like, oh, we'll just chalk this up to boys will be boys. And I think it's boys are boys and girls are girls, and there are differences between the sexes. That doesn't mean that everything that comes from, like, everything that's testosterone driven doesn't mean that's acceptable, because biologically you are different. We are different as the two sexes, and there are biological drivers that we have evolved, from biological evolution, how men and women are, and just how humans are, regardless of sex. That doesn't mean that's automatically okay or ever okay. Like, we're hopefully conscious enough and civilized enough to know that you can't just go off and do whatever you want, and that's okay, because boys will be boys.
Well, boys will be boys, but they'll also be respectful.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And they'll make space for little people around me. Thank you very much. And they will not throw the weight around.
Yeah.
Like, there are things that, how do I put this? So I'm very lucky to have lots of kids in my family and to get on well with all of them. Like, I love being around them. I feel like the world teaches girls to be small and not take up space, and the world teaches boys to take up space.
Yeah.
And so the world will teach that. The world will teach girls how to be kind and neat and all that, and the world will teach boys how to be domineering. And you don't need to teach those things. I feel like I need to teach my boys to be gentle.
Yeah.
And I feel like I need to teach my nieces to be brave. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I think there's there's a whole load of without listing all the blogs I listen to, like in terms of biologists that will talk about, again, population level stuff in terms of the differences between typically how, because of how we've evolved, how men are and how women are, but the socialization layer on top of that is still there. It's not one or the other. So actually, even if there's a more population level typical male response or behavior or typical female response or behavior, that doesn't negate the fact that there's a societal expectation that people have grown up into that either exacerbates the extremes of those, and actually then it's the, like you say, it's not teaching boys things that are exacerbating that makes it sound too negative, but exacerbating what might be a natural, more way for typical male response, and we're coming to counter the socialization aspect in terms of how we raise. children. He says not having children of his own, so it's very easy for me to talk about. My sisters love it. I tell them how to be better parents all the time.
It's, yeah, I mean, the thing about having children is I used to think that kids were pretty much a blank slate.
Yeah.
And I don't think that anymore.
Mm.
My two couldn't be more different. Like, they're just so wildly different. I've got one absolute man's man,
Yeah.
and I've got one fabulous dancing boy, and they are lovely children, but they came into the world with a character.
Mm-hmm.
Like, right from when they were small, they had a character.
Yeah.
And it's not that that character then says, oh, well, you've got these traits,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore you're going to end up like this.
Yeah.
So, for example, my younger son's quite naturally shy,
Mm-hmm.
but he's now outgoing because we've helped him to be.
Yeah.
And not like forced his hand either. So we go to things, and he loves socializing people. He loves people around him. It feeds his spirit, but he's shy to go to them. So you do things like have him sit on your knee at a mother and toddler group, and he'd be sort of looking over, and you'd say, oh no, don't worry, like, you can stay here with me for as long as you want to. You'll be able to go and play those great games over there when you're ready, you know. And he'd sort of sit and he'd look, and never like pushing it, just being home for them.
Mm.
And then they can like develop who they are. But they're I don't know why I'm talking about child rearing actually, but they are very much how they always have been. Like, you don't suddenly develop a different personality.
Yeah.
It's
I'm just conscious of time. I know you've got other things to do today. That's been really interesting, and I hope really useful for everyone watching this, whether you are a gay man, straight man. If you know gay men or straight men, point them in the direction to watch this video. I'm hoping that, I mean, there's other stuff I'm talking about in these conversations, but that's kind of a recurring thread, is I want to be talking about the things that particularly gay men need to know, whether they're in the debate or not yet in the debate, and men more generally. So yeah, comment below if you have any thoughts on stuff we've talked about, or if you'd like to see other areas expanded in other videos. Like and subscribe. Also YouTube now.
do like that.
Like something like this. And yeah, that's been great. Thank you so much, Ceri, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Thanks, James.